Welcome. Welcome everyone. Bienvenue tout le monde. I will wait about a couple more seconds to let everyone in the room before we start. Good plateau. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Bienvenue encore tout le monde to the first of our town halls for the leadership contestants. I want to start by acknowledging that I am with you all tonight from the unceded and under-surrendered territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And with that, a reminder that especially with the revelations of the last year for so-called residential schools and for many, many other reasons, that as a settler, I commit to the work, which starts with learning and sharing truth and seeking justice. So tonight, we are here to have a conversation with Jonathan Pedneault, who is running to be the next leader of the Green Party of Canada. The format for the evening will be me doing a very short introduction and then a up to 10-minute speech from Jonathan, then a long period of questions and answers. We'll start with questions that were submitted beforehand, and then you can add questions into the chat, and then we will end with just a 1-minute closing statement. My purpose here tonight is just to be the moderator and giving questions, so I am otherwise going to be silent. In terms of housekeeping, down at the bottom of your screen, you will see that there is interpretation so that you can hear us in English and French quand on parle un des deux langues. So if you'd like to hear in whatever language of your choice, please check at the bottom. For the evening, the chat is closed. This is really for simplicity because otherwise it can get confusing on our end. The Q&A is open. Please leave your questions there. A reminder that we want to make sure that everybody is safe in this environment, and so we're encouraging respectful discourse towards candidates, moderators, staff, etc., everyone in our lovely party. So with that, c'est à vous, Jonathan.
Merci beaucoup, Amita. Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. I'm very excited to have an opportunity to engage directly and individually with all of you. I know and I can recognize some of the names in the attendees list. It's very strange to now be talking to a screen without seeing all of your wonderful faces. I'm guessing you'll have to bear with mine for a little bit. Je vous appelle aujourd'hui depuis Jojake, aussi connu sous le nom de Montréal, qui est sur le territoire non cédé des Kanien'kehá:ka, donc la nation Kanien'kehá:ka qui a pris soin de ce territoire pendant des décennies avant que les colons français arrivent ici en Amérique du Nord. I'm grateful to them for their custody of the land, for hosting us, and for all and everything that we can still learn from them. Recently, it was National Reconciliation Day, an important day that should truly take place every single day. And I spent the day, and I want to start by sharing some of the things that I've learned myself about the federal relocation program in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, which was led by RCMP officers and federal officers of the Crown that took Inuit families from the southern parts of northern Quebec to a place called Ellesmere Island, which is all the way north, a place where no Inuit were living prior to this relocation. And they were brought there through lies and deception and left there to fend for themselves for 2 years. A pretty horrible story that I encourage all of you to discover and reflect upon. My journey to politics started when I was 17-year-old, when as a high school in early university student, I decided to become an activist for human rights. When I was 15, I saw the movie Hotel Rwanda, which shook me to the bones and convinced me that it was necessary to have a strong Canada that would fight for human rights globally. I could not believe for the life of me that more than 40 years after the Holocaust, a genocide had happened in Rwanda when I was 4 years old. But it was even more distressful to realize when I was 16 and 17 that genocidal acts continued to be committed in Sudan under the eyes of the international community in a place called Darfur. That led me to contact the CBC with another documentary maker, and we convinced them to send us off to Chad. When we got to Chad, we convinced Sudanese rebels to take us across the border into Sudan, where we found destruction and despair. And that was a very harsh encounter for me as a 17-year-old with the cruel reality of a world where international institutions that we've built following the Second World War are not actually doing the work that they should be doing for everyone. Following this extremely difficult experience, I continued in the world of journalism, traveling to places of conflict to meet with people whose lives had been destroyed by human folly, but also at times by environmental crises that very much affected their livelihoods and their ability to live and survive where they were born, and forced them to new lands where oftentimes they were met with hostility. This work, something I've been doing now for 14 years, I think is important in my coming to the Green Party now. 6 months ago, I was standing in the middle of the train station in Lviv, asking my colleagues who were coming into Ukraine to bring some iodine tablets with them, the types of tablets that you ingest if you're exposed to nuclear radiation. And it was a crazy experience in 2022 to have to reflect along these lines, to have to ask for my colleagues dealing with security at Human Rights Watch, where I was working until the month of May, to have to ask them what are the appropriate protocols in case a nuclear plant is affected by the conflict, or in case, God forbid, the Russians decide to use nuclear weapons. It felt like I had sleepwalked into a World War II movie set, but it was all too real. And interestingly, that was just a mere few weeks after the so-called Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. And that too was also real. It was all too real, in fact. And these two realities just kept colliding in my mind as polar opposites, but they belonged in the same category. They are and were telltale signs of an increasingly unstable world. C'est un monde où tous les signes pointent vers l'urgence, la catastrophe, vers le chaos, la souffrance, pas juste dans les pays lointains, mais ici aussi à la maison. Recently, I was on Magdalene Islands, tiny strips of land in the St. Lawrence Gulf that were very much affected by Hurricane Fiona. Et c'était dévastateur de voir et de rencontrer des Canadiens faire face à des situations qu'ils n'avaient jamais connues, une tempête d'une ampleur, d'une force jamais auparavant connue chez eux, qui était véritablement demandait une action plus forte de la part du gouvernement fédéral, de la part des autorités fédérales pour se préparer à faire face à plus de tempêtes comme celle-là, parce qu'on sait qu'il va y en avoir de plus en plus. More storms, more problems, and it's difficult, in fact, to express just how angry many of us feel, how helpless and anxious many of us are. Because growing up, my generation, we were told that we would live in a world of where, the end of history was nigh, where the moral arc of history was bending towards justice. And politicians, the elites, the media, they would tell us how brilliant a future we would have, where there would be no poverty, no inflation, no recessions, that the world was our oyster in many ways. Of course, now Europe is at war. We're faced with historic droughts. We've seen the floods in Pakistan. We know that there will be food insecurity in Africa this winter because of the conflict and because of climate change. A miscalculation at any point, at any time, since February, and especially right now, could prompt us into a nuclear confrontation. And inflation is pushing more and more people towards poverty, just as the climate emergency hits us. If we think that Canada will be spared, I think we're badly misguided. We need to take the telltale signs seriously. There is one party in Ottawa that has consistently done that, and it is the Green Party of Canada. Vous tous, en tant que membres, vous avez porté sur vos épaules un parti qui a eu énormément de difficultés au cours des 2 dernières années. Et pour ça, je veux vous dire merci. Je veux vous dire merci parce que votre engagement, votre courage, votre travail, c'est véritablement ça qui nous permet aujourd'hui d'avoir ces discussions avec 6 candidats qui, je crois, sont assez engagés à s'assurer que le Parti vert véritablement prenne sa place à Ottawa. At a time when we're faced with someone like Pierre Poilievre, who's in charge of the Conservatives, when we see Justin Trudeau, after 8 years of promises, being unable to deliver on the fight against inequality, on the fight against climate change, when we see more and more people being attracted by radical solutions that flirt oftentimes with right-wing extremism, the voice of the Green Party of Canada, the values that we represent, that we fight for, are more needed than ever. But let's be real here. The last 2 years have been difficult. We have a financial situation that is extremely tenuous at the moment. We have had a lot of bad press in the media from various journalists who have capitalized upon disputes that truly happen in any political party, except that in ours, because we're who we are. People express themselves much more freely than they would in the Liberal or the NDP or the Conservative Party. And we've seen media capitalize on that and in fact attack us constantly for the past 2 years. It's so crucial right now with this election that we take the right decisions to bring the party to a new stage. We have to elect the people who will stand in front of Justin Trudeau, of Jagmeet Singh, Pierre Poilievre, Yves-François Blanchet, and tell them and Canadians that the Greens are not dead, that the Greens are very much alive, that the Greens are very much continuing to fight for a livable future, for future generations, for to protect our communities from coast to coast to coast. I've decided to embark in this with Elizabeth May, in part because that allows us right now to have a leader in the House and me outside of it who can continue to engage with all of you throughout the country. I think my time is up. Merci beaucoup. J'ai bien hâte de répondre à vos questions.
Thank you. Okay, I will start with the first question, which we got from BC. If elected leader, will you push the government to stop all fossil fuel subsidies in favor of providing support for companies and individuals developing renewable energy sources? And I would go so far as to say, how will you do this?
Well, the first part of this question is easy to answer. Yes, absolutely. We're still, this government, the federal government, continues to subsidize the oil industry and other polluting industries throughout the country with billions of dollars every year. We've seen a federal government, the Liberal government, deciding to acquire in the name of the Canadian public a pipeline that will be, that is in fact a hidden subsidy to corporate big oil in Alberta. That needs to stop. There is money out there. That money needs to be spent on adaptation and on making sure that our small and medium businesses are competitive and can develop products that will help with the transition. Now, of course, there are lots of lobbies in Ottawa pushing for exactly the opposite. We see, and we've just seen now, Alberta elect, well, in fact, not Alberta, but the United Conservative Party of Alberta elect someone like Danielle Smith, who is very much keen on preserving Alberta's oil industry. We see in other provinces strong provincial premiers who are less than keen to support the green economy in Ontario and in Quebec. It's so crucial that we have a government in Ottawa that is willing and able to push back on these premiers to defend the rights of all Canadians from coast to coast to coast to a healthy environment and a livable future for their children. That passes through the end of these subsidies and more investments in green solutions and green entrepreneurs here at home.
Maintenant, une question du Québec. Que comptez-vous faire pour calmer les crises internes qui secouent le Parti vert depuis des années et qui l'empêchent d'assurer sa crédibilité au sein de la population?
Absolument. Les crises internes du Parti présentement ont un grand impact sur la confiance que les Canadiens sont prêts à nous octroyer lorsqu'on est en période électorale. Il est crucial qu'on parvienne à bâtir une confiance entre les différentes institutions au sein du Parti. Ça fait 2 ans que le Parti vert, tout comme le reste de la population, est affecté par la COVID-19, par la situation de pandémie à laquelle on a tous été soumis. Une situation qui a empêché une bonne partie du staff, des conseillers fédéraux, des membres de notre Fonds vert, qui est l'agent officiel du Parti, du caucus, de se rencontrer et de se connaître en personne, face-to-face, comme on dit en bon français. Un des premiers actes qu'Élisabeth et moi souhaitons mettre de l'avant lorsqu'élu, c'est de rassembler tout ce beau monde-là ensemble dans un contexte qui sera favorable à avoir des discussions honnêtes et transparentes, à justement bâtir une confiance qui est nécessaire pour nous amener de l'avant. On ne peut pas avoir un parti où les gens sont brûlés parce qu'ils s'impliquent trop au sein d'un parti qui ne leur redonne pas suffisamment, ni en termes de gratitude, ni en termes d'exposure. C'est important que notre parti prenne soin de son monde. Moi, je suis quelqu'un qui, dans le passé, a travaillé dans plusieurs zones de crise, à aider des équipes journalistiques à rapporter sur des enjeux extrêmement difficiles, des massacres, des violations des droits de l'homme, dans des contextes où ils étaient eux-mêmes directement affectés, où leur maison se faisait brûler. J'ai cette expérience justement d'aider des groupes à bâtir une confiance nécessaire entre eux pour justement atteindre un objectif conjoint. On a un objectif au Parti vert, c'est de faire élire autant de députés que possible, puis de s'assurer que notre caucus ait tous les supports nécessaires, les moyens nécessaires pour bien faire son travail à Ottawa. Elisabeth et moi, on a toute l'expérience nécessaire pour ramener ça au parti. On a eu un parti fonctionnel par le passé. On va en avoir un encore à nouveau après le 19 novembre. Ça, c'est très clair.
Okay, merci. And now from Ontario, please share with us your vision for a carbon-free future. How would we get there and by when? Please make sure that you address electricity, heating, and transportation. Thank you.
We clearly need to have more connection between the various provinces. We need a transnational electric grid and that is something only the federal government can invest in. It's crucial that we move as quickly as possible before 2030, if possible, to decrease our emissions by at least 45%. The ICPC told us as recently as April that if we fail to do that collectively, not just in Canada, but in the rest of the world, we are faced with the likelihood of an increase in average global temperatures of 1.5 or 2 degrees. And that is an extremely scary prospect because let's remember that at 1.1, we're already seeing storms like the one we had in the Atlantic, but also, of course, the heat dome in BC, the floods in northern Canada, the retro in Ontario. So action is needed as quickly as possible. When I look at Canada and at the immensity of our territory, it's very clear that we have the resources and the ability and the knowledge necessary to build a carbon-free economy. Sadly enough, the investments that should have been done decades ago were not made quickly enough, and instead we've collectively decided to elect governments that continued to finance and subsidize the oil industry. One way to transition as quickly as possible, first and foremost, is to stop subsidizing these industries and take that money and invest it in the construction of an electricity grid that goes throughout the country. Engage in negotiations with various provinces. Quebec produces a lot of electricity, but most of that electricity is sold to New York instead of benefiting Canadians across the country. There are so many other avenues for us to produce energy in this country, whether it's green hydrogen, whether it's wind power, whether it's geothermics, but the money needs to be invested in the right place and at a fast enough pace that we can do this transition without hurting average Canadian families too much. My family comes from northern Quebec. There is no public transportation out there. It's impossible to get from point A to point B without having a car. And for most people, it's way too expensive to acquire or buy a Tesla or a hybrid or a fully electric vehicle. We need to be cognizant of that and recognize that that is a reality that exists in Canada and that we need to respond to as well as we transition off fossil fuels. And one way to do that, of course, is to invest as well in public transportation and in alternatives for Canadians to transport and meet their daily needs in ways that are more sustainable, to have closer circuits and an economy that's closer to where people live, so that they can consume products that are produced nearby, as opposed to being imported from abroad over long distances. So we have all the tools we need, but there's a need for action and investments. The federal government has that money. If it takes away its subsidies from the oil industry and puts them into helping entrepreneurs here at home, and there are ways for us to live a life that is closer to our own values if we can implement the basic livable income for all Canadians. That is a promise of the Green Party, and that's been a promise for the Green Party for a long time. That money exists. It's high time that we, as a country, start to invest in our population by ensuring that everyone has a livable income that doesn't require them to drive long distances to get to a work, that won't allow them to then invest in their communities and take the right decisions to ensure a livable future for our children.
Et maintenant, une autre question du Québec. Quelles seraient vos interventions et mises en application durant votre mandat pour lutter contre l'autochtonophobie et l'islamophobie?
L'autochtonophobie et l'islamophobie?
Oui, et les autres formes de racisme aussi.
Il y a des discussions très importantes qui doivent prendre place avec les Premières Nations, avec les peuples inuits et métis à travers le pays. Jusqu'à présent, on parle évidemment au niveau fédéral, mais aussi au niveau provincial de réconciliation, mais il y a très peu d'écoute, il y a très peu de discussion par rapport à ce que ces nations-là souhaitent véritablement mettre de l'avant, non seulement au sein de leur propre territoire, mais au sein de l'ensemble de la Fédération canadienne. On a un gouvernement présentement qui parle de réconciliation constamment, qui met en place des journées commémoratives, mais qui de l'autre côté va aller causer des divisions au sein des conseils de bande, ou va aller mettre certaines communautés en opposition à d'autres communautés, notamment sur des questions d'exploitation des ressources naturelles ou des droits de passage dans les territoires que ces peuples-là, dont ces peuples-là ont été longtemps les gardiens. C'est important qu'on approche ces questions-là d'une place humble. Il faut être humble par rapport à ça. Je pense que depuis trop longtemps, on a une attitude qui demeure très paternaliste au niveau d'Ottawa. Ça, c'est pour la question des peuples autochtones, mais véritablement, c'est pas à moi de proposer des solutions concrètes, c'est à moi de dire on va ouvrir la table, on va vous écouter, on va mettre ensemble les actions que vous nous demandez pour protéger non seulement les territoires que vous avez habités depuis longtemps, mais aussi protéger vos langues, protéger votre culture, faire les investissements nécessaires pour s'assurer qu'il y ait une bonne compréhension de la part de tous les Canadiens des enjeux autochtones, de l'histoire autochtone de notre grand pays et qu'on en soit fiers. En termes d'islamophobie, c'est quelque chose qu'on voit et de xénophobie de manière générale, c'est quelque chose qu'on voit de plus en plus, non seulement au Québec, mais partout dans l'ensemble du pays. Les valeurs vertes sont très claires à cet endroit. Il faut être inclusif. On apprécie et on valorise la diversité. Je crois qu'on trouve à Ottawa d'autres partis qui sont tout aussi d'accord que nous sur ces enjeux-là, que c'est important d'assurer des libertés individuelles, libertés de religion également, tant et aussi longtemps que ça se fait dans un contexte et d'une manière qui ne brime pas les droits des autres. On va continuer à défendre ça, continuer à défendre la Charte canadienne des droits et libertés et continuer à montrer l'exemple à travers toutes nos discussions, tous nos engagements avec tous les Canadiens d'un océan à l'autre.
Okay, and now a question from British Columbia. How specifically do you plan to work collaboratively to build the Green Team and bring people together?
Well, I intend to continue exactly what I've been doing so far, which is to travel through the country, sleep on couches, eat at people's and members' dining tables and engage with them and ask them questions. Again, all of my life, I've worked as a journalist and a human rights investigator. My approach to solving issues is through engagement and questioning. We need to continue and build on the amazing work that Amita, and I'm not throwing flowers at you here, but the amazing work that Amita has been doing for the past year, traveling throughout the country. There's a need to heal. There's a need for a lot of members to be heard. Elizabeth and I held a Q&A town hall a couple of weeks ago. Our chat was completely open to anyone wanting to ask any questions, and we responded to all of them as truthfully as we can, and based on the knowledge that we have. But we also need to come to this place and to this position from a place of humility. I think that's true for both Elizabeth and I. Elizabeth, of course, has contributed enormously to this party. I have done my contributions mostly abroad to other institutions and people who were suffering in parts from the decisions and the choices that we make here at home. Now I'm coming back to this country that has given me so much to contribute back and to contribute through this party. But I'm coming to this party from a place of humility. I want to continue to learn. If elected leader, I pledge to all of you that I will continue to travel. You'll see me in every community, every EDA. I'll sit with you. I'll discuss. I want to hear how Ottawa and the Central Party can best help you. I've already engaged and started to engage in these discussions. There's already a lot that we've learned. Most of that is now in our 6 months plan, which is available on our website, and it addresses a number of questions with regards to how we will rebuild the party moving forward if we are so lucky as to be elected.
And a question from Alberta. What are your thoughts on not running and endorsing candidates from other parties in certain ridings if they are climate champions?
I think that's a very interesting question. I see where it comes from, and I appreciate it. But we have a constitution that requires of us that we run candidates in every riding. We know from experience now, and especially with the last 8 years of liberal promises on climate action that were not delivered, that most other parties are more interested in pursuing other interests. The Liberals are very much the defendants of the status quo. The NDP is very close to certain unions and groups, worker groups that are far from being climate friendly. We're very much seeing that in BC right now. So I would be very cautious about us not running candidates in specific ridings in order to ensure the election of people who, like Stephen Guilbeault, might end up becoming pawns for governments that pretend to be climate friendly, but in fact continue to do the work of big oil and the fossil fuel industry.
And now, getting to some that we have from tonight. What experience do you have with the Green Party? How long have you been a member? And what has been your previous involvement with the Green Party of Canada?
I've been a member since the month of May of this year. And the reason for that is that for the past 7 years, I've been working with 2 large human rights organizations, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, which prevent their staff from becoming actively involved in politics. And there are very good reasons for that. One of them being that we engage on a regular basis with various governments, either to criticize them, as we've done a number of times with various governments, or to encourage them to heighten the pressure on abusers in other countries, something we've also done repeatedly. So I've had engagement personally, for example, with the Committee on Human Rights in Parliament about South Sudan, which is one of the countries on which I was working. So I've not been engaged or involved with the Green Party of Canada for a very long time. However, since I came back to Canada after quitting that job, and I quit that job in order to come back and contribute to rebuilding and renewing the Green Party. Since my return to Canada, I've been traveling, excuse me, I've been traveling to various communities in Ontario, in BC, and Alberta. I'll be back in Alberta soon enough to again engage with the members and learn from them and try and understand where are the places where we could do better. Again, I come to politics from a place of humility. The job that you're, the job of the leader of this party is one where we are called to serve you and to serve the members. I've understood through my interactions with a number of people that there is a lot of baggage and a lot of history out there. I'm sorry, the remnants of a cold. There's a lot of history out there that needs to be addressed. And I believe that by being external to most of these, most of that history, most of that baggage, I can bring in a fresh perspective on some of these issues and work with you all to fix them. I think that's beneficial to the party. That's in fact beneficial to any institution, having fresh faces, people who come from outside and perhaps can bring a bit of a fresh perspective on old issues. And that's what I'm very much hoping to have a chance to do with all of you if elected as co-leader.
All right. The statistics indicate that despite the huge turnout for the climate strikes, particularly in September of 2019, the youth vote is not as high as it could be. It seems that this could be a potentially lost opportunity for everyone. What will you do as leader of the Green Party of Canada to encourage the youth vote?
Well, I'm 32. I'm the youngest candidate out there, and I'm running with the oldest. But I'm very much from the X generation or Generation X. I've seen through my friends how disillusioned so many people are with politics. Again, I touched a bit on that in my initial introductory words. We were promised so much as a generation. We were promised economic growth and opportunities and an ability to buy a house and find good jobs and a world at peace. And what we have instead is inflation, war, a climate breakdown, and anxiety all around. I think it's important for politicians, and especially for our party, to recognize that anxiety, to recognize that anger, to recognize that fear, and to channel it. Elizabeth remains an absolute optimist, and I'm much more of a pessimist. I've been saying that in all of my discussions with people. I think we are very close to entering a situation where we will lose control of our ability to reduce our climate footprint and reduce the impacts of climate change. And that pushes me to try and prepare as much as possible a future where Canadians from coast to coast to coast are protected, but can also play a crucial role in helping people throughout the world who are much less responsible for climate change than we are to not only cope with it, but build resilience. I think a lot of Canadian youth are disillusioned with politics. A lot of them are asking, why should they have children? Why should they invest in politics, especially in a system that isn't representative, that doesn't represent their votes? We just had elections here in Quebec recently where Québec Solidaire, a very progressive party that's been fighting hard for climate action in Quebec, ended up with the second largest amount of popular votes, but is now the third party in opposition behind another party that had even less votes than they had. And that's a scenario that's typical and that's known to all of you, because for so many years we've been fighting for mixed proportional representation. I think that having a sharp, clear discourse on our ability as Greens to change our electoral system, to make it more representative, to ensure that the voices of all Canadians, regardless of their age, are heard, I think is key to creating enthusiasm for politics. But we need, and I think Canadian youth also needs leaders and members of parliament that represent them and that can speak for them. And that's something that's been lacking for all too long. And I'm in politics in parts to try and solve that.
How do you see the relationship between continuing economic growth and sustainability?
Continuing economic growth is not sustainable because we have finite resources on this planet and also finite resources in our own lives. We see more and more people wanting to work more in order to earn more, but who end up burnt out. And the same applies to our natural world, which is being exploited and extracted, exploited by us, who are extracting as many resources as possible to grow an economy that doesn't benefit most of us. We are being harvested as Canadians, as workers, by a system that feeds on us but doesn't feed us. And it's high time that we have a concrete discussion about the shape and the form of our economy. The economy is here to serve us, and in order for an economy to serve us and to serve our children, we need to make sure that this economy doesn't destroy the planet the way it's been doing now for at least 200 years since we entered the capitalistic times that we are living in. So we need to have this discussion with Canadians. I think they are, I think most of us are ripe for it. COVID-19, which of course slowed down the economy, also highlighted a number of systemic inequalities that existed in the Canadian society, but were sort of hidden or not discussed or not seen. They also highlighted, I think, the need or the desire by a lot of Canadians to spend more time with their loved ones, more time in their community, more time doing things that they like and love, as opposed to pursuing the endless growth of an economy that doesn't serve them in return. So we need to have this discussion. I think we can have a more circular economy that will be closer to our communities and that will serve us better, but also reduce significantly our imprint on the natural world, which we need and which the economy in general needs in order to survive. There is no, and I love this quote from, which was quoted by Marx as well, but from this British economist who says that the capital, that labor may be the mother of capital, but nature very much is its father. Without nature, there is no economy, and we need to be cognizant of that and work within the limits that nature imparts on us.
The Green Party has been subject to all kinds of accusations of interpersonal strife, including racism and climate of fear. How do you propose to lead the Green Party so that these issues do not overtake our key leadership on the climate and biodiversity crises?
These issues need to be addressed. I've been hearing from some people, both inside the party, but also outside the party, that we're spending too much time discussing that, and that we can't do that because the climate emergency imposes on us to only solely focus on that. The reality is that we can do both at the same time. We can do both at the same time in the right way. Right now, what we've seen so far is that a lot of discontent came up to the surface, was not addressed properly through the appropriate channels in the right way. There was insufficient support from key structures within the party to deal with these issues, and after a while, just like with anything, pressure builds up and then it comes out into the public. We need to avoid that, and the best way to avoid that is to address these issues through accountability, notably, but also through listening and through love and through the green values that we all strive and aspire to see reflected, not only in our own party, but throughout Canadian society. Values of diversity and respect for diversity, and participatory democracy, which requires all of us. Now it's very clear that our key fight is to ensure that we have a livable future for our children and future generations. And that is exactly what Elizabeth and Mike have continued to do in Ottawa consistently, day after day in Parliament. Our Green Caucus has been relentless in their efforts to pursue accountability for the government's climate inaction. I was in Ottawa with Elizabeth following my visit to Magdalen Islands to call on the Minister of the Environment to speed up the implementation of their soon to be delivered national adaptation strategy. For now, they're saying that they won't start to adapt this country or implement this strategy before 2030, which is way too late. We're the only party who's consistently hammering the government on these issues, which are crucial. Sadly enough, some journalists love gossip. They love to dig into issues that are frankly irrelevant to Canadians, that exist in every political party, once again, but which in our case come up to the surface because we don't address them soon enough through the proper channels in a way that is that reflects our values as Green.
How would you build relationships with the other MPs who are not Green and work with other federal parties?
Well, I already have good relationships with a number of MPs whether they are Liberal or from the Bloc Québécois, or from the NDP, perhaps less so. But I'm a likable guy. At least I like to think so. And someone who likes to engage with people. I've been doing that throughout my life, engaging with rebel groups, with government officials, with ambassadors, with representatives, ministers, military men in various countries in different languages. Throughout my career, have been doing that in order to try and protect the rights of other people. That's very much what my work, my career has been based on. And I believe that I can continue to do that work in Parliament, discussing with other MPs. I know, and Elizabeth knows, that a number of other MPs in the Liberal and NDP caucuses are disillusioned with the way their parties have been dealing with the climate emergency. They would be more than happy, I believe, to join us if only we could have stable and predictable leadership. Right now, we don't have, we haven't had that sort of leadership. We've had an excellent, amazing interim leader, but after 2 years of turmoil, we need to have that predictable leadership in Parliament as soon as possible. That's the option that Elizabeth and I are bringing to the table for all members to choose and vote on.
It's really hard not to smile when you compliment me, so I'm going to ask you not to do that. Can you point out other ways in which the present government is subsidizing fossil fuels other than pipelines?
Well, we just had a decision by Minister Guilbeault to give, in effect, to give Canadian oil and concessions to the Norwegian state-owned company Equinor. And as some of you might know, before moving back to Canada in May, I was living in Norway and working on various human rights crises abroad from Bergen, which is right next to the coast and where most of the oil industry, or a good part of the oil industry anyway, in Norway is located. That industry in Norway has been nationalized some 40 years ago. And benefits now all Norwegians, and a good chunk of that money is now being spent on adaptation in Norway for Norwegians. Now, Minister Guilbeault, 2 days after the release of the latest IPCC report, basically gave the permission to that Norwegian company to drill for oil off the coast of Newfoundland, and the profits of that oil, instead of benefiting potential adaptation projects here, not that it should be exploited to begin with, but just to add insult to the injury, the profits of that oil, that Canadian oil, will serve to finance adaptation projects in Norway. So that's one example where the Canadian government continues to make and take decisions that are not helpful at all for our ability to fight climate change. But otherwise, I mean, the Canadian government consists, whether it's through whether it's through export assistance or tax cuts, or the cleaning up after oil companies leave ecological disasters behind, the Canadian government, both at the federal level, but also at the provincial level in Alberta, have been subsidizing our oil industry far too much, and that needs to stop as soon as possible.
How will you work with and grow the Green Party of Canada's relationship with IPAC, which is the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Circle?
Well, we've now asked to meet with them as candidates, and we hope that we have a chance to learn from them and hear from them exactly how we can address what appears to have become a bit of a crisis of confidence between some of our Indigenous members and the instances of the party. We need to be much better at listening and understanding. Elizabeth and I, early on in the campaign, went to Fairy Creek, not as part of a campaign event, but very much as an opportunity for both of us, and especially for me, to learn about the fight to protect the land that took place on Fairy Creek. But once again, I mean, I come back to my initial comment about humility. I think, as a settler on this land, and so is Elizabeth, we need to show humility. We need to show a willingness to learn. That's what I did on National Reconciliation Day. I spent the day reading through old notes from the federal government about this relocation program that I was telling you about during my initial introductory remarks. I want to keep on learning, but especially I want to make sure that our Indigenous brothers and sisters take the front stage and are empowered by our party to bring forward a message that is representative of the wisdom that they collectively have and that has preserved this land for so many centuries before settlers and settler culture came upon this land.
What would be some of your top policies that you would like to work on implementing if elected?
Internally or externally? Sorry. Or is that not specified?
I read that as externally, but it is not specified.
Externally. Well, the first, I mean, so if we are elected, and again, I just want to emphasize the Green Party has amazing policies that have been established by the Green membership. In order for them to be implemented, we need to elect more MPs. Without MPs, we cannot enact any of these policies. We need to have a strong presence in Ottawa that is led by strong leaders, co-leaders, that is able to inspire the trust of Canadians. And in order to get there, we need to stabilize things within the party. We need to empower our members. We need to grow. We need to grow as soon as possible. We need to grow our intake of money. We need to grow our basin of potential candidates. We need to empower our EDAs, empower our members, empower the structure. And in order to do that, we need to stabilize it again. So I can't emphasize that enough. This election is crucial for our ability to bring forward these policies to Canadians. From my perspective, clearly, we need to cut our emissions as soon as possible. We need to have mixed proportional implemented in Canada in order to defend our democracy and ensure continued respect for our institutions. And we need simultaneously to invest in infrastructure that will protect our communities from coast to coast from the climate disaster that the Conservative and the Liberal NDP coalitions governments have been cooking up for us. Again, so much of these policies should have been enacted and implemented in the 90s and 80s, and they weren't. Now we have to deal with what's coming, what we know is coming. We will be able to reduce our emissions if elected and if we have more Greens in Parliament, but we also need to be cognizant of the fact that resilience needs to be built throughout Canada in order to protect our communities and our children from what currently is a distorted reality, a new distorted climate reality, and what we know will continue to be a distorted one in the future. So we need to have the infrastructure needed to protect our agricultural sector, for example, as we see more and more droughts throughout the country. We need to protect our forests. We need to protect our water. We need to protect our ability to deliver that water to people. We need to make sure that all Canadians from coast to coast to coast have access to water, which they currently don't. So we need to put in place this infrastructure that will protect us from the climate, the new climate reality that again, Liberal and Conservative in action are forcing us now to live through. And only the Greens can do that. But in order to do that, we need to stabilize, we need to empower, we need to grow and elect more MPs.
Scandinavian countries have recently been leading the world in putting a green economy in place and advancing their Green Party. What have you learned from living there, and how would you apply that in Canada?
Well, There's a, yeah, I did live there. These are places that I love. But once again, the Norwegian economy, the Norwegian green economy is based very much on the profits of their oil industry, which were nationalized in the 60s and 70s, and which allowed the state to invest now, as they are doing, into this green economy that will help their country transition. In Canada, we made extraordinarily different choices. We decided, despite an early attempt at nationalizing the Canadian oil, we decided that it was better for private investors and private ventures to take over. And in spite of these ventures not always being profitable, we pumped money into them because they created jobs which we didn't want to lose. And now we are seeing these companies make enormous profits, but paying all too little back to the Canadian society at large, both provincially and federally. If we want to follow the Norwegian or Swedish model, then we need to stop subsidizing and start taxing more. And that is entirely in our power. That is entirely in our ability. Again, these are extraordinarily functioning countries that have invested a lot in public transportation, in their train systems, in reducing inequalities, and they've done so through taxation and through making sure that the profits from their natural resources, their national natural resources, come back to the nation and are distributed equitably among various communities, as opposed to being extracted by private investors that often don't live here.
What will the Green Party do to change the healthcare system such that seniors can actually have quality of life, and the sandwich generation, seniors' children, can still be employed and count on community care to assist seniors to remain in their homes?
Of course, health is provincial, and I come from Quebec, where politicians here in Quebec City keep on hammering that it is provincial and the federal government should not, overtake or overstep. That being said, there is a Canadian law on healthcare. There is a Canadian health law which needs to be applied throughout the country. Interestingly, when I was in BC, I met with a number of people who were telling me about how Albertans, upon retiring, decided to move over to BC in order to enjoy how beautiful BC is and the mild weather, but they had not contributed to the BC health system through taxation during their career, yet expect, of course, as any Canadian would, that they would be able to receive proper healthcare in BC. Meanwhile, Alberta is trying to attract as many doctors and healthcare professionals to its province, and is therefore draining neighboring provinces from their workforce because Alberta is able to pay them more. So we have this dichotomy here between provinces, where certain provinces are competing with one another, whether it's on the, by offering better salaries or better work conditions, and that is having a very clear impact on the ability of our healthcare system to the provincial level to deliver for Canadians. The federal government needs to make sure that when it gives money to provinces, that a certain standard of care and is met. So far, we haven't seen our federal government do that and play that role. In fact, Trudeau appears oftentimes to be very scared to meet with his provincial counterparts, and that needs to stop. That we need to have a federal leader and a federal government that's willing to stand up to the provinces, but also make sure that Canadians from all parts of the country have access to similar level of care. That's one part of the answer. The other, the other is to make sure that we have Canadians growing up or growing older in a healthy way. Having spent time in Norway, where physical activity outdoors is extremely prized and something that every young person is encouraged to do early on and keep practicing throughout their life, is something that certainly helps keep the general population healthy for a very long time. Can't tell you how often I was taken over by someone who was probably twice or 3 times my age when going up a mountain in Norway. So people are active, and that is supported by a strong social net and government programs that keep Norwegians active. If we have basic income, livable income for all Canadians, that is also something that would allow children to take care of their parents the way it should be. And unfortunately, because of work, because of the demands of this economy, we're not allowed to do that right now. Now, I think there is one last short question from Amita. So, yeah.
I'm giving you a time is up message. So there's one last question, and then you'll have a minute to conclude. But I want to let everybody know that this was the first of 6 rounds, of course, of town halls, 2 each week, starting today and tomorrow. And tomorrow evening is with Anna Keenan. So please come also to the other town halls. The last question, and then you have a minute to conclude, is will you run in any by-election in any part of Canada?
No, not now. If elected as leader, I pledge to you to continue to work with all the EDAs throughout the country to make sure that the party is in stand to have a full slate of candidates and a strong media presence, stable leadership by the general election. I cannot do that while representing Canadians from a specific district. I think it's crucial that our leaders, our next leaders, spend as much time as possible reconnecting the party and making sure that it functions well before we engage in the national election. And my view of leadership is very much that the leaders, the next leaders, need to prioritize the need of the party as a whole over getting elected in one specific riding, the way we saw play out in 2021. So I think it's important that we have leaders that will be out there, will meet Canadians throughout the country, will build strong EDAs where there aren't, and strengthen EDAs where they currently exist, using the fabulous knowledge and know-how that we know some of our EDAs currently have. Make sure that the resources are distributed, make sure that we have money in the coffer. And when we have all of that, then it will be time for me to get elected and join Elizabeth and Mike in Parliament.
Okay, you have 1 minute to conclude.
Well, once again, thank you for joining. This is an opportunity for the party to move forward after 2 years that have been very difficult. I'm again extremely grateful to all of you for making sure that this party still exists, that this party is still full of amazing people fighting for the future. Elizabeth and I are offering an opportunity for this party to turn the page on a pretty disruptive time, to focus on the important things on the things that are most important for members and Canadians in general, to have the stability needed to attract good candidates, money, and all the things we need to have a stronger presence, a stronger green presence in Ottawa. That requires stability, predictability, and with that we can grow. So once again, thank you for your time, and I look forward to continuing to engage with all of you. Merci.
Thank you everyone for being here tonight, and hope to see you all at the future town halls. Thank you, Jonathan, for your time this evening as well.
Merci, Amita.
Bonne soirée tout le monde.